Greetings, everyone. This is Virtuous Roots, where we cultivate virtue to bring it to our home and yours. I'm Thomas McCuddy.
I'm Thomas Quackenbush.
And I'm Nick Wiegand. And tonight we're going to talk about how do we handle bad ideas appropriately with our children and our families. And like most of these, something obviously spawned this talking prompt. So we're just going to let you tell your story, Thomas.
All right. So I think this is going to be helpful to a lot of parents because I found myself in a situation recently where my son and we had gone on retreat, and what I thought was going to be the orientation turned into the equivalent of what they called a sermon, but it sort of kind of went against everything we believe, kind of everything we stand for. And I was just sort of in shock. And we're also in a situation we can't get up, we can't leave. Like, we're right in the middle of this room. And so here I am with my 14-year-old son, and he's having to listen to this, and we're listening to this together. As I'm going through a variety of emotions while this was going on, because there is some element we know that we can't shelter our children forever, and they're going to expose some things. But this was just so bad and so directly opposed. And so I think the reason for bringing this up is, in a big way, you're going to find maybe situations like this where you're with your child or you hear some things. Maybe it won't be as bad as what I've encountered, but you're gonna watch a movie. You're gonna be at a family gathering. You're gonna be somewhere where your children are going to be hearing things that go against everything you've taught them, and to not look at these as times like afterwards. Like, I didn't just apologize to my son. I'm like, oh, I am so sorry, so sorry. Immediately afterwards, I said, let's break this down. What did you hear? What went on? And he did really good. He called out. He's like, here's the inconsistencies. Here's the issues. I can't believe you said this. And we had a really good, like, debrief, really, from what we heard. And I want to encourage parents that these can be constructive learning experiences. They don't have to be something you just kind of run from. Not that you have to go seek them out and, like, okay, let's just go plop ourselves in there. There may be times for that, but I want to encourage parents to already have in mind a little bit when this comes up, when this happens, how to handle it. That's
Right.
the major prompting for this.
That's good. It's not us sitting here saying, this is what's right and then all these other things are wrong, but there is a technique on how to deal with these things. There has to be. So, what are some of the initial ways, other than if you're just sitting there? So say you're not there and your child hears this. How, what is the technique to even be able to address these types of things?
Well, I think, kind of like I said, when you debrief afterwards, asking them, what did you hear? What do you
Yeah.
think? Like, I think starting with that rather than just offering the direct rebuttal, because I think that might be what we want to do. We might be like, okay, so let me set the record straight, and then just kind of contradict. Again, part of the learning process, letting them sort of work through these ideas,
Yeah.
because that's what they're going to have to do when we're not around.
Yeah, I'm going to point something out here in a second, but I think you were going to say something.
Well, yeah, I think that because for my experience too with my sons, especially my daughter's 7, so she's getting it, but not like on the level they are right now. But like they'll like they hear things and I'm not there. They'll bring it to my attention because well, because their dad. I mean, I teach Bible every week, but it's the idea like they have their set of beliefs that have been instilled, and now there's things that people are saying that are contradicting them, and they're trying to say that their views are true. And so, like, there is this tension. I think Thomas is absolutely right when he, like, your children are bringing these to your attention. You're like, what do you believe about that? Why are you bringing this to my attention? Was this like why? And then they were like, well, this is because you always taught us that it's like this, or this is what the Bible always says about this, and it doesn't seem like it kind of matches up. But I'm like, well, what do you think? Does it match up? They're like, no. I'm like, then you're able to work through that on your own, and you're able to come to that. Now you can stand firm on what you believe. You're not just me just passing down information, but you're actually owning it. Now it's being, contextualized in society because we warn them. I spent a lot of time warning the teenagers at my church that, when you go to college, there's going to be people that come up against what we're talking about. Right now, we're in like a nice little bubble. Most of them go to Christian schools, so they're homeschooled. But if they go to college or university, their ideas are going to be challenged left and right. And so I felt like as a father, as a pastor, I feel like at least try to equip them so that they can have some of those questions
So
answered.
my kids were not in a bubble. My kids went to public school.
Yeah.
They did not grow up in that bubble at all. But what I wanted to point out, and I think it's what happened in my home, and I think it was one of the most important things that I did as a parent, but I want to point out to you guys or ask you the question, why do you think your kids are even able to bring it to you and come to you and actually talk to you about it?
Well, I think that's the kind of culture we create that, again, I try not to react. And I think this goes back to some of my training as a youth pastor, that when uh, teenagers would bring sort of earth-shattering news, I wouldn't shatter in front of them. And I think
Yeah.
my kids know that. Like, they know they can come to me and I'm not just going to explode. I'm not going to react, and they can trust. But I think there's also an element that my children also do trust me.
Yeah.
They understand that, that, like, I do try to teach them, and they respect that. So
Well, I think it's, you don't react, but you also don't go off and go correct the person or go handle the situation. Right. And a lot of parents want to go just snap and, well, I'm going to go show them, or I'm going to
Yeah.
take care of this, or I'll fix it,
It's almost, I find like, because I've had times where, because when we hear those things, I mean, for us, if we hear them, like there's something in us that kind of jars, and we get slightly angry because it's going against our belief system, going against the God that we believe in.
One thing you said was, well, I teach Bible, that's why they come to me, you're a professor, and maybe there's a part of you that thinks that's why they come to you, but the reality is it has nothing to do with why your kids go to you. They go to you because you've built a culture of trust.
Mhm.
I know absolute morons who are dads who kids think they're like walk on water because they built a culture of trust, yet they couldn't, they can't slap 3 syllables together, and love them to death, but has nothing to do with your accomplishments or what you actually know. It's because of the culture that you've built in your homes. My kids will share with me awful things. I mean, things that no father wants to hear, but it's because I built that culture of trust. So I think, and that's kind of how you started. I think that's really, if we're going to have this conversation, how do you handle these bad ideas with your kids? Is first off, you have to have a relationship in a way that can even foster the conversation to where they can even trust that you're not going to go say anything to anybody, but like you just said, you have enough self-control, and temperance, enough control over your own emotions that you're not gonna, they're not gonna think they're hurting you, they're making you angry, but they can actually talk to you.
Mhm.
And so you brought it up, and I just wanted to make sure that was, if this is a podcast or show on how do we, raise our families, we cannot help our kids handle these bad ideas if we can't have these conversations. And I just want to make sure everybody understands that it's got nothing to do with your level of education. It has
Right.
nothing to do with it. It has to do with your, the environment that you fostered in your own home.
I think that's what we see many times portrayed within the TV shows, where these parents want to speak truth and they encounter, and they've not built that with their kids.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's what your sitcoms are made out of.
Well, I think the
many
problem
times.
is unfortunately, I don't think it's just in the TV shows. I mean, I know, like my kids' friends, my children's friends will talk to me, and they don't tell their parents anything. They don't tell their parents anything because they are so deathly afraid of what is going to be said, the outcome of actually sharing any part of their life.
hmm
And so I don't think it's just sitcoms. I think we've created this. I know there's dads that are like, "Oh, my kids don't tell me anything. My daughters won't tell me anything. They only talk to their mom." Well, Bubba, that's because you've built a terrible relationship with your
Yeah.
daughter. It's not your daughter's fault. It's not your wife's fault. You've built an awful relationship. And so I think to even have the conversation of, handling bad ideas with our kids, you got to be able to, I mean, your children have to be able to talk to you.
And I think we need to encourage parents that it's going to take time. That,
Sure,
in the
absolutely.
case of my 14-year-old, I've worked on this for 14 years.
Right.
And even if I was just starting now, I'd still have another good 4 years to go. And I think sometimes parents, they they catch on to this later, and they think, oh, I wish I had done this from the beginning. Well, start now.
Yeah.
Start doing that, and you're gonna have to repair damage. But there's also an element.
Well, just before you move on,
Mhm,
I've got bonus kids, right? And so I came into one of my daughter's lives when she was 14,
mm,
and we have built an incredibly strong
Mm.
relationship. I mean, she's 25 now, and we built an incredibly strong relationship. She's one of the daughters that will tell me things that no father really wants to hear, but she needs me to be there for those things.
mhm.
So it's not too late. I mean, I just want to make sure. But go ahead. I just
Right.
wanted to make sure, like, I didn't let that one go.
No, 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 no. And I think that's why parents need to hear that. And I think for parents that have not listened, I think I even go back to my wife and I. We waited. We were married almost 10 years before we had children, and I think the early those first 10 years were me learning how to communicate with my wife, learning how to deal with that. And I feel like early in my marriage, I messed up so badly, but once I came to terms with
She does
that,
confirm that, by the
she
way.
does
She
absolutely
does.
confirm that. But as I learned this and I began building, here we are, we're going to be celebrating 24 years of marriage this year. It's taken time to build that up, but I want to encourage parents in this, and I want to also point out that in experiencing these things and not just being that person, like, so we're talking about, your child comes to you, tells you this thing, that's one thing. But in the case of being there with my son, he was actually, I was very aware of him looking at me. He was watching me. Like, he's looking to see how I'm reacting.
Mm.
So this is why we talk virtue as well. The whole idea of virtuous roots. We have to be these things. We have to have already cultivated these things in our lives for our children to see it. And I think that's another key point to all of this, is that if we're going to handle the world and we're going to walk with our kids are going to know when we're coming from a place of roots within ourselves versus we're just kind of putting on a show with this one
Right.
particular incident.
Mm.
And so the idea of the relationship, being able to even handle it, and that culture that you guys have cultivated. The other side of it, I'm gonna read Ephesians 4:11 through 16. The other side is, and he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves, and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness, in deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, make the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. And so while we have to have the conversation, we also have to have the foundation to be able to even identify bad ideas.
Mm.
And I know there are people who come into the church and, without naming specific authors, but there are now people who come into the church and say, look, I had these authors' books on my shelves thinking that these were Christian authors and they were good things. I want to live my best life now, but oh, sorry. I want to live my best life now, yet it's all heresy, right? So there has to be a foundation to be able to identify what these bad ideas are. So where does that fall on us as parents?
Well, I think it's something that has to be lived out in the home. I mean, because it has
Well, what does lived out mean in
like
this?
should like what you're teaching them is also how you're. It's not just like the things that you're saying. It also has to match your behavior. Like if you're expounding and you're saying these things are true about Christianity or what you believe and like what you have your faith in, then if you don't act that way, your kids are going to pick up on that inconsistency. And they're not, and also they're going to see you as a hypocrite, and they're not going to want to, they want to see somebody they can trust. Even, just because you're their parent doesn't mean that you have like that's one thing I realize as a young parent is that just because I'm their father doesn't mean that like I'm automatically owed this relationship with them. And I think that's true, like kind of what you're saying
Okay.
too. And you have to develop it. You have to be intentional with your children and be involved in like because a lot for me, like I pair the like we have our time together where we go through the Bible and we talk about these types of things. And then there's times when I'm talking about whatever they're interested in because I want to honestly care. If they're going to care about what I'm interested in, I need, there's this like reciprocal aspect of building that relationship with them. So now they come to me when they have these questions and all the stuff that I'm teaching them, it's becoming making more sense in their lives.
Okay, so with that relationship, like, now how do we keep from being tossed to and fro?
Hmm.
What? How do we identify the bad ideas?
Well, I think this is why, and I wanted to bring up again with the passage, that last part with the pastors and teachers, the shepherds and teachers. That's the role of the parent in the family. We don't often think of ourselves as shepherding our children, but there's a sense that we are.
Absolutely are, yeah.
So we've got to know what the truth is. We have to know, and in many ways also know what some of those bad ideas are and what those red flags are when we hear those kinds of things.
Well, how do we
So,
do that?
well, that's going to involve knowing the word. Number one, if we don't know the scriptures, we're not going to be able to live them out. We're not going to recognize when people are contradicting them. That's almost kind of what I felt like the other day. It's like just Joel very quickly was able to identify the exact passages. Like he said that Jesus didn't say these things. He literally said these here. Like he's identifying exactly because he knows the word. So that's where we as parents, we have to know the word. And it doesn't mean that we are all. I think sometimes people look at, again, us, we got theology degrees. You don't have to have that. If you have experience with the scriptures, if you know it, everything that you do know comes into bear.
That's a fact. Yeah, yeah.
And so I think there's some element of, it goes back to in our own discipleship and our own walk and our own learning, everything that we are. One of the principles of discipleship is well, I'll say it the way we do in the country scene. You can't give what you ain't got. Okay, gotta get that. You can't give what you ain't got. You have to have that in yourself. And so I think this is why I try to encourage parents that when you're sitting in your small group and you're studying the scripture or you're doing your devotions, as you're learning all of those things that you're getting, that is something that you're going to be able to pass on to your children. That's the kind of thing that you're able to speak from. And all those things that you do with your children, that's preparing them for when the false ideas confront them. And just like the passage said, so we're not tossed to and fro.
Right.
We don't have to have letters in front of our name or behind our name in order to be able to identify truth. We just have to be diligent. It goes back to
Well, I think there's some.
loving the truth.
I think as people are going to hear this, though, because I know it's probably where I came from. People are hearing this and they're probably going to go, "Well, that's easy for you to say," because you do have the letters behind your name. So, I mean, I'm a pastor, and I know we have a unique relationship. I'm a pastor, but Thomas, you are one of my mentors, especially when it comes to theology. And I've got three men in my life that, if it comes to theological questions, that I'll go to. And you all are different, but I know, I'm a pastor, but I know enough to know that I need to have people in my life to depend on, because I don't have all of the answers. And I think it's important that, really, no matter what spiritual level you are in life, that we should have those. And so I'm going to make each one of you tell me, who in your life is your mentor? Do you go to? Who do you keep around, for lack of a better way to say it, to lean on, and to go to when you have questions?
Well, I got obviously Thomas as well because we're both his students. Yeah, so I usually, I'll give you my sounding board, some ideas that I have. I got my pastor, and I mean, I think they also, not just on like how the word is applied. My pastor, he's the one that would speak into my life, and I trust him to bring out things that he sees, like if I'm, straying in some way or something like that. So, and just people that I go to, I have, I have a network, and I think they all, serve a different purpose in my life, and I try to serve a purpose in their life as well. But yeah, that's the kind of thing. I have Thomas, I have my pastor, I have, other men that are also in my church that I
Okay.
try and they look up to, they've been around, they've pastoring a long time. I can ask them some questions and things that from their experience. So
And what about you? Who do you have in your life that you go to about theological questions or life questions or these types of things?
So like Thomas Aquinas and dead mentors or not?
Nope.
Okay,
Mm-mm.
just curious. Okay.
No.
No.
That is literally the most snooty answer you could have given.
No.
I know
So
you're joking, kind
yes,
of.
yes. No, and it really so half joke because I think it is important. I
No,
think
sure. I'm not trying to take away from
right. I
the
think there
giants that came before.
there is an element of having those people, having those that you go to that have stood long in the past and have
Right, yeah,
stood the
yeah.
test of time. I think many of my issues, I ask weird questions, but I have in terms of when if I'm really struggling with something, and again, we have the network between us that even though, like, again, you guys were my students, there is an element, your lived experiences, your knowledge sometimes is in an area very different than mine. And so I've never diminished that. I've never denied that. And so that's why, and I think sometimes professors tend to miss that. They don't realize like, oh, you can actually learn with your students, and that student teacher relationship is only there really for the classroom. I think in a big way, but I think
Well,
in terms of
all three of mine are former professors that
right,
I've developed into friendships and
mhm.
it is, and
mutual
that
respect.
continues on, and in many ways, some of the friendships that I developed with guys I went to school with,
Mhm.
those would be the ones when, again, I've got some of the stranger questions, I might go to them. But that's where in my life, it's one of those where
Give me a first name so somebody doesn't think you're just making things up. Give me a first name of someone.
Simon,
Okay. So
yes,
the reason I'm making you say it is because people are going to hear these things that we're saying,
mhm,
and I really want them to understand that it doesn't matter. You do have letters after your name. It doesn't matter what that is. You don't have to do it on your own, and you ought not do it on your own. You should be leaning upon the men and women that are around you
Mhm.
to help you identify these bad ideas, to help you understand how to approach your children, to help you how to foster the environment of trust and openness and understanding in your homes. I just want to make sure that as they're hearing this, they're not like, "Oh man, I can't do that."
right.
They have to understand that it is absolutely it doesn't completely fall on their shoulders. I mean, if God is the rock and the foundation, then the church that surrounds them should be the ones that help them through hardships,
And
these challenges.
I think why I wanted to, I think why it's good with me answering this is because for the longest, I didn't have anybody. And so for me, I think over the years, and that's why I joked about with the materials, with the resources, I found myself having to go there. But I will say that, in recent years, by having people, by having brothers who can stand with me,
Mhm.
that has been it's so much better as we were joking and talking about that dialogue,
Right.
being able to learn through dialogue. You can't do that with a book. But that's my encouragement is to many parents that we live in the pinnacle of resources in
History of
any
the world. Yeah.
civilization, in history of the world. So we are blessed to be able to find the kind of answers, particularly that our kids are going to have.
We got to close out. I
Yeah.
appreciate the conversation, gentlemen. There are a lot of bad ideas out there to identify. We can give you a list. No, I'm just kidding. But you need to be the guardian of your family and what is allowed into their homes and their minds, and you need to be able to teach them how to stand against it. So you can find us at familiesofvirtue.com. Our podcast, Virtuous Roots, can be found on all streaming platforms. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. God bless.